Test. Okay. All right, that seems to be working now, finally. Took it a minute. So today we are talking about professional selling and its role in marketing. We have a professional sales program here at UCO, and one of the things that is difficult for us in selling you on a career in professional sales is that lots of people have had bad experiences with a sales situation. They have walked onto a car lot. How many of you have bought a car? Okay. And purchased a car, and it's an unpleasant experience for the most part because you're going to spend more money than you really want on something that you absolutely need and you don't want to be taken advantage of. And it's easy to feel that way. And so most people have had a bad experience in sales to the point that some companies, and one company that used to sponsor us, Bob Mills, made advertisements out of it called No Shopper Stalkers, because a lot of times when you walk into furniture stores, they have more salespeople than they need, and you feel instantly preyed upon as they follow you around. And so it's hard to talk students into getting sales degrees, even though almost all of you will start out, your first career will be in selling. Whether you're a finance major or accounting, you're going to have to sell. Everybody sells something. If nothing else, you sell yourself. And of course, the camera is not, there we go, not moving. Got to stay here and watch whether or not I'm on screen. So sales is really critical though, and most people, that's going to be their first job. And everybody is going to sell something. You're going to sell yourself. You're going to put together a resume and try to get a job. That's basically a sales document. So the skills that we develop in professional selling can be translated into a lot of other contexts as well. So they are not just valuable in the sales world, they're valuable with your family, understanding things like social styles, which part of the prospecting or part of the challenge that you will do for Thursday. So again, on Thursday, we'll have another group prospecting challenge. You can use this room if you want. And this one, you're going to be, again, working, assuming that you're working for Love's, but you're going to be in a sales role, working for their fleet sales division. So Love's not only has stores where you buy gas. A lot of people, when they come to our competition, which we use Love's as the product, they're like, I don't want to go work in a gas station. I didn't get a degree to do that. They have a commercial fleet division that does light mechanical and things like that, tire sales for trucking companies. Speedco is one of the companies that they own that does light mechanical. And so they have salespeople that go out and find trucking companies. And that's what you're going to do, is you're going to do a prospecting challenge for this one. Instead of using AI, although you could use AI, it's going to be more difficult because the trucking industry is notoriously opaque. So there's not a lot of information out there that large language models can capture and use. So it may be more difficult, but you're welcome to use the AI if you can try to find something on AI. But this one is probably going to require more than using AI, which will point out one of the limitations in AI, I think, is that with regard to this, because trucking companies, for the most part, are not publicly traded. Lots of them are small family firms or mid-sized companies that are closely held. That becomes more difficult. So sales skills are transferable to other contexts. For example, in the political marketplace, the Constitution of the United States requires that the president deliver from time to time to Congress a State of the Union. And historically, if you went back to George Washington's time, the president just sent this over and it was read into the congressional record. He didn't actually go to Congress and deliver it. But in the modern era, in the modern contemporary era, this has become, and those first addresses that the president would send over to Congress were really sort of about the nuts and bolts of what's going on in government. You know, we had X number of dollars in taxes that we took in, and we're going to, you know, spend them. It was kind of like a budget summary in many respects in those early ages. Now, this has become the president's opportunity to sell the nation on his platform. So politicians use sales skills to persuade voters, to, if nothing else, get them to go out and vote for them. I was listening to a comedian on the way in named Kathleen Madigan, and she apparently did this stick when Obama was president, and she said, I think he thinks a lot more of us than he should, because he's like, America, I'm going to need you to help me with this. And she's like, sir, we've got other things. Like, we elected you, and you know, we've got Shark Week, and so that highlights kind of some of the challenges that we have with sales, is that people have other things that they'd rather be doing than listening to you. So you got to persuade. So politicians use it. Friends use sales techniques to influence each other. When you go out with your friends, you want to do something. They may have different ideas as to where they want to go or what they want to do on a Friday or Saturday night, and you're going to have to try and persuade them to do what it is that you want to do, or they're going to have to persuade you to do what they want to do. So we use them in familial and friendly settings as well. Family relationships often involve persuasion. Children are great salespeople with their parents. They want to do something and their parents don't want them to do it. Although I found that your generation, more than mine, does less than this, because you don't ever want to leave the house. Why would you? I mean, why would you want to leave the house? You got everything that you need right there. You got your, I don't know, what is the latest and greatest video gaming system out there? What is the number one gaming?
Console's probably PS5 right now.
You think it's the PS5?
A lot of people play on PC now. It's the other thing.
Right. A lot of people don't have the dedicated PlayStations. They have gaming computers that have huge amounts of computer graphic interface that allow you to play these single shooter games and things like that you can play with other people online. My nephew is constantly changing. You know, I learned how to play Fortnite, and I went down to Dallas one time. This was probably 7 years ago, and he was, I don't know, 9 at the time or something. And I said, hey, Carson, you want to play Fortnite? He said, I haven't played Fortnite in a month, Grant. You know, it's like, oh, you're so yesterday. You got to do something else. So I had to convince him to, you know, show me what was the most recent thing that he was playing. And I think it was at that time he had switched to Call of Duty, I don't know, Grand Theft Auto, something like that, which was, I thought, highly inappropriate, but apparently his parents didn't think so. So you're going to use these skills in lots of other places. For corporations and companies, the value of salespeople is really, really difficult to fully measure, because new and innovative products require that we engage in sales to achieve the adoption, particularly when you're talking about radical transformations in technology. So years and years ago, when I came back from New Mexico State and started teaching here at the Harvard of the Hills, the Stanford of the Sticks, the Berkeley of the Blackjacks, the, did I say Oxford of the Oaks? The Princeton of the Plains, the, I don't know, whatever we are at UCO this week. I had a student that said, hey, have you seen this new product that's been launched by Google? And it was called Google Glass. And it was launched and it became a miserable failure. People didn't like it. They thought it was creepy. And now I have these Meta glasses and people don't think it's creepy at all, and people use them all the time. And we've just sort of accepted that we've got this invasion of privacy, right? So it takes salespeople to really get you to see the advantages of using things like the Meta, Ray-Ban Meta glasses, or the Google Glass, which didn't make it out of their sort of testing phase. Salespeople are really the eyes and ears with the external environment for the company. They're the ones that are going to be able to tell you what changes are and what kinds of things your clients need. So when I was in industry, I worked for a company that produced learning management systems for the K-12 market. And one of the things that we did is when George W. Bush was elected president, he decided to implement on a national level programs that he had started in Texas. And the national level one was called No Child Left Behind. And the idea was that we were socially promoting a lot of students from grade to grade, and there wasn't a lot of evidence that maybe they were learning stuff. So the critical thing during that time period became measuring grade level competencies in reading, math, and sort of the core, reading, writing, arithmetic of the K-12 educational experience. As online developed and became more sophisticated, and we had a really good backbone and a really good program called Learning Letter Sounds, which really worked well in getting a lot of poor school districts up to grade level in terms of reading, because it worked really, really well to teach kids how to read at grade level who were behind. And so we became very popular with those kinds of districts. But as we grew and developed, there were needs for greater and greater titles. And as the testing switched to testing all kinds of other things, because metrics became much more important, we had to develop new titles. And it was our salespeople, the reason I tell you this story is, it was our salespeople who were out there talking to the principals and teachers and superintendents who were saying, what is it that you're going to be needing in terms of developing content? So unlike the college level, where if you go into D2L, I build the entire course myself. They don't let teachers at the K-12 level do that. They don't let them choose the textbooks that they use. They have to use textbooks that are approved by the district and lesson plans that are approved by their curriculum people. And so all of these had to be fed into a system that was adopted by the states, or was permissible at the state level. And I think I told you all a story at the beginning of the semester about how this can work. One of my friends, not in a learning management system, but wrote a textbook for K-12. He was a political scientist, and he wrote a textbook for the K-12 market for high school civics classes. And they talked about this models of federalism, the layer cake model and the marble cake model of federalism in the textbook. And California, which is one of the states that you have to be able to sell your textbooks in the K-12 market, said, we're not going to let you approve your textbook if you keep talking about layer cake and marble cake model, because it promotes unhealthy eating habits in students. Because thinking about cake will get them to want cake, and that's bad, right? We shouldn't be eating cake. So it's salespeople who are the ones who are going to know that kind of thing. They're going to be out there, talking to these people and saying, what is it that you need? And so they are the eyes and ears of the company with the external environment. It's the most important job in any organization. When I was in industry, had a president and CEO who every year at the company party would say, because he didn't understand accounting, I guess, he was mystified by it, and we were a publicly traded company, so we had to file these things called 10Qs and 10Ks with the SEC, and he didn't understand those. And so every year at the company Christmas party, he would say, I want to thank Neil, who was our CFO, and the accounting department for keeping the wheels on. Really? They kept the wheels on? No, Jeff, right? Like, if you don't have sales, you don't need accounting people. You got to have sales. So sales is critical. If you're not selling, if you are a business organization and you are not selling, you have a problem. So it's the most important job probably in any for-profit organization. And non-for-profits use salespeople as well. They're called fundraisers that go out and solicit donations and try to get people to support the causes that they want you to support, like the Red Cross. So those are sales kinds of roles. So what is it that salespeople do? Well, they identify potential customers and needs. And one of the things you're going to do is you're going to learn how to do this through a prospecting exercise. And we'll talk about prospecting in just a minute. They determine how to satisfy the needs that customers have. So our salespeople would go out, they would talk to these district superintendents, they would talk to principals, and they would talk to teachers, and they would say, what is it that your students are really struggling with? Not all students are the same. As you probably remember from your high school career and before that, you had subjects that you probably liked better than other subjects in high school, right? Americans on the whole, by and large, have a tendency to not like math. I was one of those people that did not like math. I don't know how I got through the PhD program, because there were 23 hours in advanced statistics that I had to take to get through that program at New Mexico State. And I am not a mathematician, but somehow I managed to get through those, with the grace of God. I will admit that it's become easier because programs like SPSS and SAS are far more easy to use and produce the results that you need. But understanding how you get there is equally as important, right? Understanding what the fundamentals and the limitations of those techniques are, and that's all, higher order math. So, and then they provide customers with information on products and services. Because they are so critical, compensation is generally higher for salespeople than other parts of the firm. If you get an accounting degree, and again, I'm not knocking the accountants in here, although I don't know how anybody stays awake long enough to get an accounting degree, you're going to earn a salary, and you're going to know what that salary is, and that may be a nice salary. With professional sales, you can actually set your salary. One of my friends, Adam Tucker, who worked for US Foods, so my family owned this business in Guthrie. We owned 7 bed and breakfasts at one point in time, and we had a restaurant as part of them, and US Foods was our distributor for a lot of the food products that we used. And Adam was like, I decided I wanted to take my family, and this was a long time ago, to Disney World. And so I figured out how much more I had to sell every week in order to be able to take them on a week-long vacation to Orlando, stay on property at a Disney resort, and he wanted to stay at one of the premium resorts and not have to worry about, like, we're going to eat at where we want to eat and do the whole, like castle dining experience in the Magic Kingdom at Cinderella's castle and eat where you wanted in the World Showcase and not have to worry about that. And he figured out that all it would take was having to sell an extra case of meat product every week in order to be able to pay for that and not have to put it on a credit card. And so he decided, the next year he was going to take his family and do this. And he sold an extra case of meat by working out margins and figuring out which restaurants were most, likely to have higher demand at various times. And so because of that, he was able to adjust his compensation to what he wanted it to be. Again, nothing wrong with being an accountant, but you're not going to do that. There may be some variable compensation plan if you go to work for a large enough company, but it's not going to be the same as it is for salespeople, where you can basically say, I want to make, and I think at the time he had figured out to take his family, his wife, and his 2 kids, that it was going to be something like, and this was many, many years ago, it was going to be something like $9,000 to be able to do that. And he made an extra $10,000 that year by selling 1 extra case of meat in his territory. So he was able to really impact what he was able to provide for his family because he was good at his job. He was a good salesperson. There are lots of positive aspects of sales. Sales is a critical function in any market economy. Being able to identify needs and fulfill those needs is a critical function in any market economy, and even in countries that still sort of say that they don't maintain a market economy, although they do, it's still an important function because you have people's needs and wants, and you're going to have to figure those out. So success in sales requires a number of things. Personal integrity. Ethics is really, really important because, and what we teach you in a sales program is how to use persuasive techniques. And some of these techniques are enormously powerful. And so you need to have high ethical standards in order to be really good at sales. If you are really very persuasive, but you're not necessarily ethical, if you are, sort of, and when we talk about leadership, right, there are types of leadership that are less than wonderful leaders. They may be able to move people and motivate them, but on less than ethical, grounds. And so what happens, what we see broadly in those contexts is that, and if you think about this in the context of car sales, one of the reasons why so many people have a bad experience with cars is because it's an enormously high-priced item, and one that you're pretty vulnerable in, particularly in the postmodern era, in which the cars are not just things that you can go out and fix under the shade tree. The days of shade tree mechanics are really kind of over, because they're not just a mechanical device where you push the accelerator down and it pulls a rod and floods the carburetor with fuel, right? These are computerized items now that are providing exactly the right amount of fuel flow to the engine. There are hybrids, right, that are now not just providing power via a combustion engine, but also through electricity. And then there are all electric cars out there. And so they've become very complex, and understanding that can be very, very tricky. You can't just go and when I was a kid, you would take the car to the mechanic and you'd say it's making a funny noise, and they would look at it, and they didn't hook it up to a computer. Now the first thing that they do is they have a dongle that they stick into your car and download the data and figure out what's going on with your car and what needs to be fixed. And so it's not like you can just open up the hood and say, wow, well, the air filter needs to be changed or something like that. It's much more involved. And so if you've had a bad experience, you're less likely to go back. One of the reasons that Sewell and my mother drove, and I inherited her car, she drove a Sewell Cadillac, because Sewell was one of these car dealers that recognized this, that you had to maintain good service after the sale in order to keep customers coming back. It was cheaper to maintain a customer relationship than it was to go out and prospect for new customers. So you need to have a positive self-image and perseverance. Salespeople oftentimes, and one of the reasons that students don't like to go into sales or think about selling, is because you kind of have to be a rejection junkie. You're going to be told no a lot. And it's that person who is persistent in making their pitch and constantly coming back that is going to really be successful in sales. And so if you're not got a positive self-image and you don't have a lot of perseverance, maybe you should go into something else like accounting. I'm just kidding. Don't throw the duck back at me. Huh? Personal relationships, the ability to cultivate and maintain relationships is really important. One of the things that people used to say, it was an age-old adage, is don't mix business with pleasure. People want to do business with people that they like, and they want to have a relationship. Now, that relationship, in the Aristotelian model, is not going to be the relation. It's not going to be perfected friendship, right? It's going to be a friendship grounded in utility, but there's nothing wrong with that. And Aristotle didn't believe that there was anything wrong with that. You also have to have pretty good intellectual development and the ability to empathize with other people, to understand what it is that they're feeling. Even in a business-to-business context where it should be more rational, you have to have an ability to empathize, recognizing that your prospect has needs and they need to fulfill those needs in order to maintain their job. And so what is it that you can do to help them? And having that kind of empathy is one of the critical factors that you need to develop. So the basics of professional selling begin with identifying needs and prospecting. And we'll go into more depth in just a minute about prospecting, what you're going to do for the Critical Thinking Challenge on Thursday. You have to assist potential customers in recognizing their own needs. A lot of times They don't know what their needs are. In the early era, and I think we have, I'm going to look, Dell computers here. Is this a Dell? Dell was sold online, and they built the machine. I'm looking to see. Yep, it's a Dell. Or at least this, yep, this monitor is a Dell. They built the machine around what it was that you thought you needed. A lot of people, when Dell started doing this, didn't really understand what they needed. You needed salespeople to say, well, what are you going to use this for? Are you just going to sort of use it to word process? In the early days of computers, before the internet exploded, when I got my first personal computer, it wasn't hooked up to online. It was primarily if you wanted to play games on it, you didn't play games on it. You had an Atari or a Nintendo or something like that, because that was a much better platform for engaging in that kind of interface. But there were games that were designed for the computer, and you loaded them through these series of disks that you all have never seen, but we still have icons of this. So when you click on the save icon on your computer, it shows a little disk, which is what we used to have, which were these floppy disks. And I can remember one of the games that I had on my computer that I played was something called Leisure Suit Larry. It was kind of a really crappy game by today's standards. But anyway, it was figuring out, well, are you just going to be really using this for word processing and maybe doing some basic Excel kinds of programs, or are you going to be designing things using a heavy computer graphic interface for brochures and things like that? And it's salespeople that assist in recognizing what it is that you need, providing solutions to those needs, and then persuading customers to make a decision or to use products or services, and then finally following up and making sure that after the decision is made, that they are satisfied with that decision and that they're likely to be and continue to be a customer. So since we have a professional sales program here at UCO, I'm one of the coaches for that program. We go out and we go to these sales competitions. And it's always interesting when I tell people that we go to sales competitions and that I'm a coach for this professional sales team. They're like, they have competitions for that? Yes, there are literally competitions for every single thing that you can think of. Anything that you have an interest in, there's probably a competition. It has the number of competitions and the degree of sort of differentiation and specialty is incredible. Again, when I was a kid growing up, I grew up on a cattle ranch in northern New Mexico. I showed horses, and there were sort of two types of people that were involved in sort of the horse showing world. There were cowboys that did rodeo, and then there was the English world, and English was divided into just a couple of disciplines, the oldest of which was dressage, and then there was also jumpers. And that was kind of it. There weren't a lot of other sort of shows out there. You either did dressage if you were in English, or you did jumping. Now there's saddle seat, there's English country pleasure, there's Western dressage, which I don't think of as being dressage, but apparently they do. And there's all these different, there's eventing, there's drill, where they try to get the horses, and these people dress in costume and do it to music and try to time things. So there's all these different kinds of competitions. And yes, there's a competition for sales. There's quite a few competitions for sales. I host one of those competitions. And when we go to competitions, one of the things that we focus on is, developing the skills necessary to make presentations so that you can be successful in a career of selling. And one of the things that we try to instill in these competitions is that independence. You have to make independent decisions. Salespeople will oftentimes, they have a range of things that they are capable of doing. Adam, my friend that I was telling you about, who decided he wanted to take his family to Disney World, he had, there was a minimum amount of money that he could sell, but he could offer discounts within a range on the products that he sold, which is one of the ways that he was able to make the sales that he needed to get to where he was, that he was able to take to Disney World, was because he had independence. He could come up with sort of the pricing structure depending on what people were buying. He was allowed to give greater bulk discounts for those companies that were buying more stuff. There's a lot of variety. Anything that you are interested in, you can sell. If I were to go out back into industry now, probably one of the things, because I am a licensed commercial pilot, I would like to do is I would actually like to be an aircraft salesperson. I think that would be like a fascinating job, to work for Boeing, which is a Textron company selling, or not Boeing, I'm sorry, Bonanza, which is a Textron company selling, single engine personal aircraft. I think that would be just like a fascinating job, particularly as aircraft are becoming more and more like cars, in that they are, they're working on, through the Experimental Aircraft Association, EAA, various models of, being able to move people around in low level, low atmosphere hovercraft and things like that, to use them as taxis. I think that would be really, really interesting. There are lots of opportunities for advancement in sales. Although a lot of our sales students find that they don't want to go into sales management. And one of the reasons that they don't want to go into Salesforce management is because you have a higher base usually, but your commission structure and your variable compensation structure is a lot less. And so they don't necessarily want to go. But there are lots of opportunities for advancement. And then finally, sales is an incredible way to develop entrepreneurial skills. A lot of my students tell me that they want to go into business for themselves at some point in time and be entrepreneurs. When I first came back to UCO, there were a number of cupcake shops that had popped up in the city, and this became sort of a nationwide trend. I think we're seeing this trend now with cookies, but I had lots of students that would say, they'd say, I want to open a business. I'd be, what do you want to open? And they'd be like, I want to open a cupcake store. And I'm like, how many cupcake stores can we, and by the way, all of those cupcake stores are now gone. They've all gone. One of the ones that took off nationally, I think, was a company called Sarah Cupcakes. And you can see a similar trajectory, in my opinion, with things like Crumble Cookie. I mean, the Crumble cookies are really, really good cookies, but you got to sell a whole lot of cookies. And it's one of those things that's taken off. My nieces love Crumble Cookie for some reason. They order a lot of Crumble cookies. And I sort of worry about the health benefits of the Crumble Cookie, phenomenon, as I did with the Sarah Cupcakes and Cuppies and Joe and all of those other things. But you've got to be able to see where the market is going. And sales is a great way of developing those entrepreneurial skills and really building a business and understanding, how long you can maintain that business. There are, of course, as much as I think that you should consider a career in sales because it's fun, and I enjoy going to sales competitions and coaching, and we're going to go to a new competition in the fall at Stetson, for example, which I'm very excited about. There are disadvantages, and there are people that, you should not maybe go into sales. If you are one of these people that, for example, has a horrible fear of talking to people, if you have agoraphobia, all sales textbooks will tell you that anybody can be a salesperson, and I'm not sure that that's true. Just like all leadership textbooks will say anyone can be a leader, and I'm not sure that that's, I mean, there are people that I know that do not want to be leaders. They want to do their job. And I had an administrative assistant here at UCO who, our VP that I worked for at the time kept saying, you gotta get her to develop and take charge. And she'd be like, I don't want to do that. I want to come in at 8 o'clock in the morning and do what it is that I do and leave at 5 o'clock and not think about this after I left, right? She did not want to lead. Her husband had a good job. This was what she had for her spending money, and it provided also a nice retirement. And because he was an entrepreneur and he was a leader, it provided them with a really good way to get healthcare insurance when health insurance is difficult to get before the Affordable Care Act. And so she, she didn't want to do that. She would never have been a good salesman. She didn't really want to, interface with people all that much. So your salary can be highly, unlike if you're an accountant. So the good part about, there's a disadvantage and an advantage. If you go to work for, a company, a large company, and you're the controller or the CFO or something like that, you're going to make a good salary and you're going to know what that salary is. In sales, generally speaking, it's dependent upon commission. Now, almost all of our sales jobs that we have for companies that work with us are in the business-to-business context. So there's two parts, which is a base plus commission. And usually the higher the base, the lower the percentage of commission. But it is, it's nice to know that you're not going to starve to death. Although if you don't do your job well in sales and you don't sell more than your base, you're not going to have a job for very long. And so it can be very variable, and that can be very, very difficult. When I was a kid growing up, again, the vast majority of people who sold real estate were women. And the reason for that was because your entire livelihood, if you sell real estate, is dependent upon selling houses. And that can be really, really tough. We're entering a period of time where, I have a niece who's a realtor. Her husband has a job where he gets a salary and she can afford to be a realtor because they don't rely on her income. And it can be really, I think we're going to go into a period of time where the real estate market is going to be much more difficult to sell than it was, in the previous 10 years, where houses were selling just right and left and were not on the market for very many days. I think we're going to enter into a much more buyer's market. You can have a lot of irregular hours because you might have to travel in order to do your job. So it's not necessarily going to be a 9 to 5. Travel can also be a disadvantage. If you have young ones at home and you want to be there for every soccer game, baseball game, things like that, it can be difficult to make those if you are out on the road. Well, a lot of the companies that sponsor us and work with us, Paycom, for example, you are going to be out in a territory and you have to be out in that territory so many days a week. It's usually 3 or 4 days a week. And that can be really, really hard for people if you can't take the travel and you can't take the irregular hours, because you're meeting with people when they have the ability to meet with you. And that's not always between the hours of 8 and 5, because they've got things that they may need to do as well. And then, of course, a big disadvantage is handling rejection. That is very difficult for a lot of people. We generally don't like to be rejected. It's one of the things that they're doing studies on. One of the reasons your generation, for example, likes to text is because the written word is far more ambiguous than the spoken word. My generation loved to talk on the phone. That was a big deal. We got telephones and we wanted to talk on the phone because it was harder on a phone to discern what people's real emotions were, because you didn't see their facial expressions, their body language. But your generation is even more removed in that you like texting. You don't have to have an instant response in texting. And it's hard now. We've come up with emojis to sort of express what our moods are, but it's harder to tell. And so handling rejection is one of the things that can be really difficult for a lot of people in the early parts of their sales career. When we talk about sales jobs, there are a number of ways that we can classify them. So trade selling, usually between buyers and sellers who are selling in a mid-level, midstream kind of environment. So people who sell, for example, at Dallas Market, wholesalers who sell at Dallas Market to then retailers is an example of trade selling. We did a lot of trade selling in the company that I worked for, in that there are these education conferences, and we would go to these education conferences and set up our booth and meet new teachers and principals and superintendents at these and get them to try our products. At that time, you had to have a fairly large computer in order to be able to handle the amount of computing power that the program ran. And so we would set these up at trade shows and demonstrate products at things like that. Missionary sales are like drug reps who work for big pharma. They're not actually directly selling to the people who are going to use it. They are trying to influence the doctors who are going to prescribe the medication that they want you to prescribe. And the company that my family owned for a long time, made a lot of money off of writing murder mysteries that would involve drugs that the company was trying to sell. So we actually, in the early ages of Viagra, we were hired by the company that manufactured it to do murder mysteries for these doctors, and then the pitch was, the drug was written into the murder mystery for them, and then they would do a seminar after the murder mystery about all of the potential benefits of drugs like that. Prozac was another one that we did. So missionary sales, they don't sell directly to the customer. They're trying to get people to influence what is going to be used by the customer. Technical sales are people with highly specialized skills. You oftentimes have salespeople who are attached to a team. Team selling has become much more prominent in that if you're selling, for example, services like engineering services, you're going to have an engineer who can provide details on what they're going to need for certain projects. So it's the salesperson who goes out, makes the contact, things like that, but you're also going to have somebody on the team that's the engineer who can talk and tell you what the technical specifications are and things like that. And also in the chemical industry is another example, specialized machine industries and high-tech industries. New business development, this is vital for firms that are seeking growth. New business development comes with developing new ideas, finding out what it is, and then developing products that fit with the specifications that they need. One of the things that I was responsible for at the company that I worked for was reviewing the RFPs to make sure that we met the legal requirements to be able to bid on a job. And I remember going through this one, and this is a new business development example, and we did not have all of the titles that my boss wanted me to certify and say we had. And I said, Jeff, we don't have all of these. And he used an expletive. The numbers live on the edge. And I said, Jeff, I'm not willing to risk my law license because you sign these documents with schools under the penalty of perjury. But that's new business development, finding out what it was that the school districts need in terms of the titles that they are having a hard time implementing. So, for example, in a lot of smaller school districts, if their kids wanted to go to larger colleges and universities for many, many years, what was one of the requirements of getting into OU or OSU? And I think we still have it here at UCO, but they've dropped it at OU and OSU. It was a foreign language requirement. And lots of smaller school districts didn't have access. So we could provide that through our learning management system and the titles that we had, right? And that's new business development. Order taking, which is simply responding to requests. It's very basic. This is the lowest level of sales. It's the one that's generally business to consumer sales, doesn't require an enormous amount of expertise or a degree to do. And then order getting involves creative problem solving. And a lot of those are in the business consumer, although you also have order getting in the business. It doesn't take a genius to understand what a steak is, right? My friend Adam, who sold for US Foods, restaurants know. I mean, a lot of that was, although it was in the business to business context, it was order getting. And so it was getting them to understand that, you could give them better deals, things like that, but it's not like they had to explain the product in great detail. Any questions about the basics of selling? All right, so for the prospecting part, so prospecting is the search for and qualification of potential customers for your products or services. And this is broken down into several things. First, there is a lead, which is the name of a person who may be a potential customer. A lead could be anybody. You all could be leads for all kinds of products or services. We just passed April 15th. So you all, if you earned money, had to file your income taxes, and you all were, lead for Jackson Hewitt or TurboTax or, anybody who provides those kinds of services, for example. A prospect is someone who wants or needs your product. So in the tax provision world, my brother is a tax attorney, and in order to be his client, you have to be worth $50 million. That's the minimum. He's providing tax services to individuals who have vastly different needs than probably, I'm not 100% positive, but probably more than what you all need, right? How many of you use TurboTax, for example? How many of you filed taxes? You didn't use TurboTax? What'd you use? You used TurboTax? What all? You used your parents' accountant? Okay. Free Tax USA. All right. And you were confident in that product. Okay. All right. So there's a variety of these tax software or services, CPAs out there, for example, that will do these. So a prospect is someone who needs your product. You all could probably use my brother as a tax, as a tax provider. He is not probably going to be interested in doing your taxes. So even though you're a prospect, are you a qualified prospect? So a qualified prospect is a person who wants the product, can afford the product, and is the decision maker. So my mother was an entrepreneur for most of her life. She built businesses and sold them. And one of the ones that she built and sold was she owned the second largest real estate company in northern New Mexico. And she was the only all-female brokerage in northern New Mexico. So she was the largest all-female brokerage, but she had the second largest firm. The Santa Fe agency was the largest at the time. My mother's agency was called the Torero Agency, which was named after the little town where we had our summer home, our cabin. And one of the things that when she started this business that she, of course, had to buy was a copy machine. Now, they were enormously expensive at the time. And as a result, real estate contracts at the time were largely printed on these perforated forms where you filled in with a typewriter and it used something. So we still have remnants of this concept today. When you look at the line on your email that says CC, that stands for, does anybody know what it stands for? It stands for carbon copy. That's right. So there was this stuff that actually you all have never seen called carbon paper that was between the sheets of these contracts that had ink on it that was kind of sticky. And when you typed on the form, it would go through and make generally 3 copies. So there was a top page that you typed on. There was a second page, which was for the buyer, and a third page, which was for the seller of these offers. You'd type up these offers. Well, then copy machines came along and got better, and they started just using copy, right? So she bought this copy machine, and it was fascinating to me. So all of a sudden you could just take the paper and you'd put it on the copier, but you had to actually open the lid and put it down. It was made by Xerox, which was the largest manufacturers of copiers at the time. And if you had 3 or 4 pages, what you had to do is you had to say, and you needed 3 copies, for example, one for the agent, one for the buyer, and one for the seller, or the seller's agent as well. If you needed 4, what you would do is you would, put the first page down, you would hit 4, it would make 4 copies, and then you had to collate it yourself. Copiers have come a long way now, right? So the copier upstairs will collate, sort, staple, do all of this. It will run it through a feeder to make the copies. You no longer have to lift up the thing and put these copies. But I was sort of fascinated by this machine. I liked, as like lots of little kids did, I would put my hand on the copier and copy your hand, copy your face, put your face on the copier, and that would annoy my mother because they'd then have to clean the glass off so that it wasn't, smudging and dirty. And so this was sort of a fascinating machine. So now when I become a college professor years later, we've got these copiers upstairs that are like very sophisticated, and we can use them to run our tests off. We're doing less and less of this, right? So, and they used to be hundreds of thousands of dollars. To have that kind of technology, the collation, the stapling, all of that would be, $100,000 for a copier. They've gotten to be much cheaper. So I may be interested in copiers. I don't think I've made a copy in the last 5 years, by the way, of anything, because all my tests are now, on D2L. And so I don't have to make copies and give them to you, but I was still fascinated by these machines. So I may want the product because I'm sort of fascinated by copy machines to this day. That one upstairs, not only will it staple, it'll also put holes in it so that you can put your thing in a 3-ring binder, right? I mean, it does all of these sort of features. I can probably afford a copier that does all of those things. I can certainly afford a simple copier, but can I actually buy the copier for UCO? No, I can't. So I may want it. I may even be able to afford it, but if you're trying to sell it to UCO, I'm not the decision maker. There's only one person who can buy products. So I think the big copier upstairs is probably still $20,000 or $30,000. I don't know, something along those lines. They've gotten much smaller. The ones that used to duplex and do all of that would be like they'd fill an entire room, and now they've gotten to the point where it doesn't fill the entire room up there. It's gotten much smaller, but I'm not the decision maker. For purchases that size, there's only 2 people that can actually pull the trigger and make that decision, and that's the vice president for administration and finance and the president. And so a qualified prospect is somebody who wants it, can afford it, and is the decision maker. If you think about this, going back to my example of you in your taxes, if you all are living at home with your parents and you're under 18 and you have to file taxes because you have, for example, my best friend in high school started a company. He owned a yard service company in Guthrie. His dad helped him buy a trailer and a truck and a riding lawnmower and an edger and a weed eater and a blower, and he ran around and he did these yards. Technically, all of the money that you earn if you're under 18 is your parents. And so, he may have needed tax services, but he was going to use who his parents said he was going to use for tax service. Now, in reality, he didn't care, right? I mean, all he cared about was that he had to file taxes, and he filed taxes and paid the money on it. But he was going to use who his parents decided he was going to use. So cultivating is where you recognize that some leads are not ready, but may be developed in the future. And so that's important in prospecting. How do we go about qualifying? Well, we use what's called the Madden approach. Do they have the money? Are they approachable? This, in the business-to-business context, can be difficult because people who have decision-making authority, which is the second D, do they have the desire? Are they decision maker? May be tied into approachable. These people usually have gatekeepers who keep you away from them. If you're prospecting for Love's, for example, you're going to be talking to trucking company owners, and they're going to have people that answer the phone and are there to keep you from them. I have a administrative assistant for my law firm, and her job is to keep people away from me that are not clients. You know, there are lots of services out there that now want to sell legal software to lawyers, AI for lawyers. And she sort of screens those and keeps them away. So can you approach them? Do they have the desire? Are they the decision maker? Are they eligible? And do they have the need for your product or service? If you are, for example, when we first started using Loves as our product for the sales competition, I initially wrote the case. The first case that I wrote for them was I used a trucking or a towing company in Guthrie. And he said, you got to use somebody other than a towing company. And I said, why do I have to use something other than a towing? He's like, first of all, they generally don't have enough trucks to be a good prospect for us. And second, inevitably, local towing companies already have established relationships, and they're not buying, you know, like JB Hunt is buying thousands of tires a year for their trucks. A towing company is not going to buy thousands of tires. They're going to have one or two tow trucks, and they're not buying thousands. And he's like, they almost always have a relationship with another local small business. And so looking at that, you know, do they have the need for the kind of product or service that you are trying to get them to buy? So how do you go about finding these people? Well, a lot of it, and particularly in the business to business context, is going to be through referrals. People like to be asked. Ask your clients, do you have friends who could use this? A lot of it is through referrals and word of mouth, particularly in the business to business context. There are centers of influence. We call these people marketing mavens, people who you probably have friends who are like this. They love to hunt for bargains, and they love to tell people where they got stuff and what a good deal they got. They're a marketing maven for you. Group prospecting is things like trade shows. What we did with the company, we'd go to these trade shows in places where there were lots of educators, and people would walk the floor and they would come up to your booth. Planned cold calling. So using lists. All industries have databases. And so using those kinds of access and just calling. Again, going back to my friend Adam, who worked for US Foods, there was a restaurant in his territory who had had a very bad experience with US Foods, and they had switched to Benny Keith. And he went in there and made a cold call, and they threw him out. They said, you know, your predecessor didn't deliver, lied to us about what we could get, and so we're never going to do it. But every week he would go and he would cold call on that business and say, if they ever can't meet your needs. And one week they had a problem with their order with Benny Keith, and he drove the actual order up there. He went down to the US Foods warehouse here in Oklahoma City, loaded the stuff up and drove it up there and made the sale and became that restaurant's primary provider for food. So planned cold calling, direct mail and emails. You got to have a lot of them. Your lists need to be up to date in terms of your databases because people's email addresses, particularly in companies, it's odd. When I leave UCO, I will get to keep my email address for a variety of reasons. First of all, my email address here at UCO is actually a student email address. I got it when I was a graduate student here. So we let you keep your email address forever and ever because the institution wants to maintain a relationship with you because they want you to become donors. So I get to keep my email address. But most of the time when you leave a job, what happens to your email address? gone, right? The company locks your email address because they don't want you sending out emails on their URL, right? So it can be tricky using mail and email. Observations, trade publications, things like that are good methods of finding people. Civic groups and associations, events, and then of course directories of industries in which you work. There's a trucking, for example, there is a trucking directory that provides information, including detailed information on the size of fleets for businesses like Love's. Then you can have company-initiated prospecting, and the web, right, is a wonderful method of prospecting, finding prospects. So what you're going to do, I've already posted it to D2L, is you are going to find 5 prospects for Love's Trucking, and then identify who you think the decision maker is at that company, and then what their social style is. Now, if you're in my professional sales class, I would have you also do an exercise in which you tried to identify what their, not just social style is, but what their psychographic style is. So it's group challenge number 6. Oh, let me make sure it, once again, it's a good thing I checked because it's hidden, so I'll make it visible. Would somebody check and see if it's visible on your end now? So I have provided you in there with the links for the products and services that Love sells, and then also so that you can complete the assignment and identify what you think the social style is. I've provided you with a link on learning about social styles so you can kind of figure that out. There are 4 social styles, and a lot of times what we find is that the conflict, it's there? Good, all right. The conflict that we find in people and the problems that they may have are in selling is a difference in social styles and understanding what those kinds of social styles are. So are there any questions? All right, well, good luck. Have fun. Feel free to text or email me, and if you got ducks today, come see me. Let me end this first.